solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Afternoon, sir. State your name, please.
My name is Billy Ray Lee, Jr.
And on February 26, 2012, what was your occupation?
I was the chief of police for the city of Sanford.
You're no longer in that position?
No, sir.
When did that end?
June 22nd, 2013. 2012, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Were you then chief of police during the initial investigation stages of the case that brings us here today, State versus George Zimmerman?
Yes, sir.
If you would just tell the jury a little bit about your background in law enforcement.
I have 30 years of law enforcement experience. I started at the Seminole County Sheriff's Office as a road patrol deputy in 1982. I was promoted through the ranks to the position of captain. I retired in 2009 at that rank of captain in charge of our Special Operations Division and Emergency Services Division. 9 years of that experience was in investigations, 5 years as an investigator, 4 as a supervisor.
And where'd you grow up?
I was born and raised in Sanford.
It's your hometown?
Yes, sir.
Did becoming chief of Sanford Police Department then be sort of a pinnacle in your career for its law enforcement?
Yes, it was.
How long were you with Sanford PD as its chief?
I'm sorry.
How long were you with Sanford PD as its chief?
From May of 2011 to June of 2012.
Did you say that you came out of retirement in order to take that position?
I retired from the Seminole County Sheriff's Office and took a position with Seminole State College as their director of the Center for Public Safety. We provided training, certificate training in the areas of law enforcement, corrections, firefighting, and paramedic and EMT services, and also a 2-year degree program in each of those disciplines.
And were you then sort of recruited from that teaching position to get reactivated in law enforcement as the chief of Sanford PD?
That position came available while I was still at the sheriff's office, and I applied for that.
Particular to this case then, I presume that you were you hands-on, or were you just in a supervisory role over the investigation with the George Zimmerman case?
I was in a supervisory or administrative role at the police department.
But did you have particular focus on this case as well as time went on from February 26th during the time that you still had involvement in the case?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did that also include the playing of a 911 call for the Martin family members? Were you aware of that decision? And I want to focus you at this point, simply were you aware that that decision had been made, that the tape was going to be played for the Martin family?
My recommendation was that the 911...
I want to be careful a little bit. That's why I focused the question. I don't want to spend a lot of time dealing with the decision to play the tape. I want to focus once that decision was made, we'll talk about then that point forward. So you are aware, were you not, that a decision was made that the tape would be released to be played to the Martin family. Is that
yes,
correct? Okay. Once that decision had been made, I want to focus you on the way that the recording was played for the Martin family, okay?
Yes, sir.
So, generally speaking, with your experience in law enforcement, within the context of what we will call lineups, or whether that be a visual lineup or an audio lineup, what are the best practices as to how to handle lineups generally?
Generally, just as in, for example, a photo lineup, you would show that photo array or that piece of evidence to a potential witness in a case individually.
Okay. And what is the purpose of doing it individually rather than in a group?
So their decision is not influenced.
One from the other? One witness influencing another witness?
Yes, sir.
So if, in fact, you were showing, as an example, a photo lineup to this jury and asked if they could pick out me, would you do it as a group, as a jury, or would you do it individually, one juror at a time?
You should do it individually.
And the purpose of doing it individually as opposed to a group?
So their identification would not be influenced by others.
Is that a similar process then to what would be done with an audio lineup?
Should be, yes, sir.
And an audio lineup, similar to a photo lineup, is just having somebody listen to a piece of evidence to see if they can identify anything in that piece of evidence?
Yes, sir.
And that was what was going to happen in this case once the decision was made to play to the Martin family, correct? That it was going to be played for them?
It is my understanding that one member of their family had already listened to that tape. You know, again, my recommendation.
Right, we're going to talk, I want to talk about your recommendation as to anything other than once the decision was made, what was your recommendation as to how the tape should be played for the family members?
It should be played individually.
Okay. Do you know the result of how it was played? Was it played individually or as a group?
It's my understanding it was played in a group setting in the mayor's office.
Was law enforcement present?
No, sir.
In your years of experience, how is that normally an event that would be handled by law enforcement?
Yes, sir.
May I have a moment, Your Honor? In this particular case, then, did you ask to be present during the time that the recording was to be played by for the family?
I offered to be present. Yes, sir.
And was that accepted?
No, sir.
Were you excluded from the room?
Yes, sir.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross?
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
The mayor made a decision not to have you in there, is that correct?
I believe I asked the city manager if he wanted me to be in the
Right.
room, and they declined to have me.
City manager was your boss?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And so is the mayor, I'm assuming, too, by virtue of that? Or?
In my position, my contract was with the city manager.
Okay, all right. And the recording itself was played in the mayor's office, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And you weren't, I apologize, did I interrupt you?
No.
Did you finish answering?
I did.
Okay, thank you. And you were not present when the recording was played, correct?
I was not present in the mayor's office, no,
I
sir.
think you were in the same building, but not in the mayor's office when it was played.
That's correct.
Did I have that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you were asked about the lineup, and just so the jury knows, in case they haven't heard of a lineup, what you're talking about is you don't want to have a suggestive. In other words, you don't want to have, normally a lineup includes 6 photographs, right?
Yes, sir.
And you have a person look at the lineup and then identify if they know one of the individuals that did something to them or was a witness or whatever. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And what you don't want to do is show them a photograph, just one by itself, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, also, in a lineup, you don't want a potential witness to a crime to have seen something on TV saying, this is the person, in this case is about this, and here's a photograph. You don't want to do that either, correct?
Preferably not. Yes,
Right?
sir.
Because that would be kind of tainting it, correct?
Correct.
So, in other words, if your experience, you had case and the witness said, oh, I saw the photograph on TV, or I heard the voice on TV, and it was, they broadcasted regarding the case of Joe. Joe was a suspect. That would be tainted, correct?
Possibly.
Okay. And the reason is because then the person potentially was influenced by the fact that the case dealt with Joe, and they knew Joe was arrested, and there's a photograph of Joe, then that would be tainted, potentially, correct?
Possibly, yes, sir.
Okay. And that also would apply to voice, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I mean, voice and photo lineups, you kind of do the same thing, correct?
If you can, yes, sir.
Right, and when you say a voice lineup, you would actually have 6 separate recordings, to be fair in terms of completely accurate. You would have 6 separate voices, and you would have the person actually listen to all 6, and then say, if you did it similar to a photo lineup, you would have a person then say, which one do you recognize, correct?
If you could have 6
Right.
audio recordings that were similar in nature, and when you
Right.
prepare a lineup, there's supposed to be certain characteristics of that person that is the subject of that photo lineup that is similar to all the other photographs in the photo array.
Right, just like if you had a photo array, you wouldn't pick if the suspect had a beard, you wouldn't put one person with a beard and the other people without beards, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Because that would be suggestive, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, and so the jury understands, so in other words, you don't want somebody potentially making a decision based on what they've seen on TV of the photograph or the voice ID versus actually listening to it without having watched anything on TV about the case.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raj.
Please, just so we're clear on this case, the issue of who was screaming for help on the tape was still an issue that you, as the agency investigating the case, was looking into, correct?
We had, the evidence and testimony that we had gave us an indication of who voice it was screaming for help on the tape, but any other witnesses that we could try to corroborate that would be beneficial in trying to find the truth.
And the indications that you had from the other evidence was that it was Joy
Objection,
Zimmerman's
hearsay.
voice.
Beyond scope.
Beyond the scope sustained.
But as to the tape itself and playing it for other witnesses, the potential witnesses are the Martin family themselves, were they not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Mr. DeLeon suggested that you go out and get 6 voices, but the reality in this case was that you would have done it in a way where each Martin family member would have listened to it themselves and come up with their own opinion as to who they heard, correct?
Objection, Mr. Levy.
Overruled.
That means you can answer.
Can you ask the question again?
Sure.
Thank you.
Within the confines of this case, is the best practice in this case, would the best practice have been to allow, once the decision was made, to have them listen to the tape? Would the best police practices have suggested that you let each family member listen to it individually and get their statement as to what they heard?
If it was for investigative purposes, to let the person that was going to listen to it individually, so that you could get their response without influence.
And that you would avoid the influence of having them all listen to it at one time, correct?
Yes, sir.
And would you agree that in an emotional circumstance such as this one would be, that the possibility for influence is even greater?
It's possible, yes, sir.
Now, you had said that it was the city manager, in response to a question by Mr. DeLeonda. The city manager doesn't normally make police decisions, does he?
No, sir.
Does he go out and fight fires?
No, sir.
Leaves that to the fire department?
Yes, sir.
leaves police work to the police department?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, nothing further.
May Mr. Lee be excused?
Yes, I don't have any further questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You're excused.
We had discussed that this might be a good time to end for the day, and I would ask for that.
Ladies and gentlemen, although you might think that it's early to go for the day, which is 4:27, we have some matters that we do have to take care of outside your presence. So instead of keeping you back in the jury room, I'm going to excuse you for the evening. During the evening recess, you're not to read or listen to any radio, television, or newspaper reports about the case. You're not to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anybody else. You're not to use any type of an electronic device to get on the internet to do independent research about the case, people, places, things, or terminology. And you're not to read or create any emails, text messages, Twitters, tweets, or blogs or social networking pages about the case. Do I have your assurances that you will abide by these instructions? Yes. Okay, with that, put your notes face down, follow Deputy Jarvis back, and have a good evening.